Ladies and gentlemen, truth is a threat to control because it exposes what power tries to hide. Those who seek to dominate others rely on shadows, on the unseen corners where lies can grow without challenge. Truth is a light, and when it shines, it reveals the cracks in the walls they built to keep people in line. They tell you their way is the only way, that their version of the world is the whole picture. But the moment you see the truth, their structure begins to shake. They know that once you see, you cannot unsee, and once you know, you cannot unknow. That is why they guard information, twist stories, and feed you only what serves them. Because truth, in its pure form, takes the power from the few and places it back in the hands of the many. Truth does not need to be loud to be dangerous. A whisper of it can travel faster than their loudest lie. One fact, one undeniable reality, can undo years of their crafted narratives. That's why they call truth. Tellers, troublemakers, rebels, radicals, anything to make others doubt them. If they can stain the messenger, they hope people will ignore the message. But deep down, they know it is not the messenger that matters. It is the truth itself that cuts through the noise, and when it cuts, it wounds their control. It bleeds their authority. It forces them to scramble, to react, to fight to keep the illusion alive. The power of truth is not just in exposing lies, but in awakening people to their own strength. Once someone realizes they've been misled, they begin to question everything else. They start looking closer, thinking sharper, refusing to accept anything without proof. That independence of mind is the enemy of control. They cannot rule over people who question. They cannot hold power over those who think for themselves. That's why they teach you not to ask too many questions, why they tell you some things are too complicated. For you to understand, they want obedience, not understanding. But truth, once discovered, breaks that obedience. It makes followers into leaders, and that transformation terrifies them. History shows us again and again. Control shatters when truth takes root. Regimes have fallen because one document was leaked, one story escaped, one witness spoke. Leaders have lost their grip because people finally saw what was really happening behind closed doors. And yet, even knowing this, they will keep trying to bury the truth, because it is their greatest threat. They will use fear, distraction, and even comfort to keep people from seeking it. Fear makes you run from it. Distraction keeps you from noticing it. Comfort convinces you you don't need it, but truth waits. It waits for the moment someone is brave enough to lift the curtain, to look beyond the surface, to say, "This is not what it seems. Would you like me to now expand keynote no?" 2. In the same intense style. Silence is the weapon of the oppressor because it creates a world where wrong can exist without challenge. When voices go quiet, lies grow louder. In that quiet, injustice becomes normal, and cruelty hides in plain sight. The oppressor does not always need to raise a hand or make a threat. Sometimes all they have to do is convince you not to speak. They know that as long as no one questions them, they can rewrite reality to suit themselves. A silent crowd is easier to control than a defiant one, because silence feels like agreement, even when it's really fear. They thrive on that fear, feeding it until you believe that speaking up will cost you more than keeping quiet. Silence is not just the absence of words, it is the absence of resistance. The oppressor understands that words can inspire, expose, and unite people. So they create systems where speaking is punished, where those who raise their voice are labeled as dangerous or ungrateful. They convince others to look away when someone is silenced, to believe it has nothing to do with them. That is how they keep control, not just by removing the loud voices, but by making everyone else think it's safer to stay out of it. And once that belief takes hold, they no longer need to silence you directly. You do it to yourself. The power of silence is that it erases truth without even touching it. A fact can exist, but if no one repeats it, if no one stands for it, it becomes invisible. Entire histories have been buried not because they were disproven, but because they were never spoken about again. People can live side by side with injustice for years because it has been wrapped in silence so thick that it feels like part of the natural order. The oppressor knows that if they can normalize silence, they can normalize anything. If no one talks about corruption, it becomes just the way things are. If no one speaks about suffering, it becomes someone else's problem. Silence turns the abnormal into the acceptable. Oppressors are strategic in how they maintain silence. They use fear to freeze you, shame to corner you, and comfort to distract you. They may intimidate you with the threat of consequences, or they may subtly convince you that your voice doesn't matter. They may make you feel isolated, so you believe no one else sees what you see. One voice can ignite a movement because change often begins with a single spark. Throughout history, it has never been the silence of the masses that shifts the course of events. It is the courage of one person who refuses to stay quiet. One voice can speak a truth so clear, so undeniable, that it resonates far beyond its origin. That voice can inspire others who are afraid, reminding them they are not alone. Fear is powerful, but so is the recognition that someone else is willing to stand. The moment one voice breaks through the silence, it gives others permission to do the same, and the chain reaction begins. What starts as one person speaking out can swell into a chorus that can no longer be ignored. The oppressor understands this power, which is why they target lone voices so aggressively. They believe that if they can silence the first, the rest will never dare to follow. They use ridicule, threats, and isolation to make that first voice seem like an outcast. They paint them as unreasonable, untrustworthy, or dangerous, hoping to convince others to stay away. But when that voice stands firm despite the pressure, something shifts. People watching in the shadows start to feel a pull. They see courage where they were told there was only recklessness. They hear truth where they were told there was only trouble. And in that moment, the first step toward a movement is taken. Movements are not born in stadiums. They are born in conversations, in small gatherings, in quiet moments where one voice plants a seed. It could be a worker speaking out against unfair treatment, a citizen refusing to accept corruption, or a witness telling the truth about what they saw. Each of these moments can seem small on their own, but when repeated and echoed, they become impossible to contain. One voice can cross borders without ever leaving the room, carried by others who retell the words, share the story, and add their own strength to it. And as that voice spreads, so does the courage to stand behind it. What makes one voice so powerful is not just the content of its message, but the example it sets. People do not rally only because they agree with what is being said. They rally because they see someone willing to face the risks they themselves fear. They see someone willing to put their name, their safety, their comfort on the line. And that act of defiance sends a message stronger than any argument. It says that speaking is worth it. The courage of one can awaken the courage of many, and the courage of many can reshape the entire landscape. Those in power are always aware of this pattern, which is why they invest so much effort in making sure that first voice never gains traction. But if it does, if even a handful of others join in, the silence begins to crack, and once it cracks, the movement begins to breathe. Fear loses its power when you speak because fear thrives in the shadows of the mind. It grows in the places where you keep your thoughts hidden, where you allow possibilities of danger and failure to echo without challenge. When you speak, you drag fear into the light. You give it shape, and once it has shape, you can confront it. Silence allows fear to expand without limits, feeding on your imagination until it feels larger than it really is. But when you put words to what you feel, you strip it of its mystery. You hear yourself say it, and suddenly it is no longer an unspoken weight. It is a defined challenge. Those who seek to control you rely on your silence, because they know silence keeps fear alive. They count on you staying quiet so the fear can do their work for them. They understand that if you ever voiced what you were afraid of, you might realize how much of it was smoke and illusion. Speaking forces fear to answer for itself. It forces the unspoken to be tested against reality, and often when that happens, fear shrinks, it becomes manageable, it loses its grip on your decisions. Speaking also changes the way fear is shared. When you keep it to yourself, you carry it alone, and isolation magnifies its weight. But when you speak, you give others the chance to relate, to stand beside you, to tell you they have felt the same thing. That shared acknowledgement is dangerous to those who rely on fear, because fear works best when it convinces you that you are the only one feeling it. Once you realize others have faced the same shadows and walked through them, the hold it has on you weakens. It becomes something you can face with allies instead of alone. Fear loses its sharpest edge when you realize it cannot stop you from acting. Speaking is an act of defiance against fear's rules. Fear tells you to stay quiet. You choose to speak. Fear tells you to step back. You choose to move forward. Each time you do this, you prove to yourself that its predictions are not absolute. And every time you speak, you chip away at the wall fear has built between you and your own potential. That is why those in power work so hard to keep you from speaking. They know that if you break that wall once, you will not stop there. You will test it again and again until it crumbles. The moment your words leave your mouth, fear loses the secrecy it needs to survive. It can no longer hide in the dark corners of your thoughts. It can no longer pretend to be untouchable. Once spoken, fear becomes something you can measure, something you can challenge, and something you can ultimately move beyond.